Hoo-yah!
So hello everyone, I am now doing part 1 of getting started with Android Studio. This is a class that I'm actually teaching in person, and ultimately what I wanted to do is use and have this opportunity to actually share my class preparation and everything that I'm putting together with all of you. Any feedback you can provide, I'm trying to do the very best job I can at breaking down Android development the simplest way possible. So before I get started, I want to just call out this book is what everything is going to be based on. I'm actually going through and starting basically from the beginning all the way to the end. The cool thing about this is it's new enough now to cover Android 7.0 with constraint layouts, which is something I haven't used a whole lot of yet, so I'm also excited about getting into that. And without further ado, let's jump over to the computer and we'll get into it. So the entire class is going to be talking about getting you to the point where I want you to be proficient and actually have a completed project at the end. So getting started with Android Studio is the place to start. So let's get into it. First off, I'm Adam Larson. I'm currently the owner of Zymo Interactive, which is a mobile development agency. I'm a co-owner, so I'm one of the owners. I have past experiences as a CTO for Silicon Valley companies. I've published a ton of video games. I've released quite a numerous number of mobile apps. A lot native, some of them not, some even like Unity 3D based, but ultimately I've got quite a lot of experience working on the Android and iOS platforms. So some of the stuff I do, I'm actually an author of a book, Building a $1 Million Agency. It's a pretty short read. You can get it for an ebook, get it as an ebook, or you can get it on Amazon in a printed copy. It's a really cool story of like what I've done to get to the point that I am now. So it's basically $2 million in sales in a matter of 4 years with the company that I currently run. So the first thing is why Android and not something like Xamarin. So personally, I feel like you as a programmer are going to be more valuable if you know native programming versus some sort of intermediate tool like Xamarin. I personally believe that the demand for native mobile application developers is going to continue to grow. There's no way that that's going to lessen from where it is today. And tools like Xamarin, if you look at the apps that are doing really well, very few of them are actually running something like Xamarin. Another example would be like the Ionic framework. I truly believe Xamarin and Ionic are perfect for utility applications, but if you want a high-end app, today I feel like you have to go native. Now that may change in the future. And I also believe like everything that we're doing in this school, a lot of you already have some experience with Java already, and hopefully those of you at home actually have experience with Java as well too. So my thinking behind this is that let's use what you already know and put it into a framework that you can be comfortable with instead of introducing a second variable on top of that, such as a new programming language like Swift. So first off, I want to just quickly cover Android distribution, because this is one of the most challenging things in my opinion about Android development. It's purely based on being able to support the largest number of devices possible. So ultimately, what it comes down to is you absolutely can't build an app to support everyone. But there are a large number of people, and you can see by this chart, that are on version 4.4 KitKat or below. So automatically, if you go to 5.0 and forward, you're only going to get a subset of your audience. So make sure that you understand who you're building for, what type of devices they have, and you need to choose accordingly. I personally have started going 5.0 forward, although some of my clients that I work with actually still require us to do 4.4, just because of that 16% number that you're seeing there. And as you can see, I haven't actually done a lot with 7.0 yet for testing. I've done a ton with 6.0 and anything between all the way back to 2.3. That's where a lot of my experience has been. 7.0 is fairly new and the saturation is still relatively low in comparison. I'm ultimately going to be using 7.0 in this book, which I think is going to be in this class as well, which I think is going to be important because it does introduce constraint layouts, which I think are going to be very powerful going forward in Android development. So the other reason that I think Android development is important is there are literally 2 billion monthly devices that are active on Google Play. That is absolutely insane when you think about the volume. It is a phone, an operating system that can actually run on very low-end phones and very high-end phones. So people that can't afford a really, really nice high-end phone can still have a smartphone with the Android operating system on a low-end phone. So that's why there's 2 billion monthly devices. And as you get to other countries as well, you'll see the Android device, depending on the income range for those individuals, actually increase if the income range actually declines for that particular country. So let's jump right into the steps for setting up. It's really simple. It comes down into 4 steps that we're going to be talking about here today. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to make sure you have the JDK, the Java Development Kit, installed. The book here actually does a pretty decent job. Otherwise, you can just jump on Google, download the right version. I'll go into a little more details here in a minute. We're next going to go into downloading and installing the Android Studio. Now, that's, if I remember right, that's about a 2 gigabyte file. So that's going to take a little while if you don't have a super fast connection. And then eventually we're going to get to setting up an emulator, which will be a virtual device on your computer, and then we're going to be able to run a test program, a test application on there. So I just want to check in, make sure everyone's awake, and if you are bored to death, don't worry, we're getting to some of the fun stuff now. So let's start by installing the Java Development Kit. Ultimately, we need version 8 of the standard kit, purely for the version of Android Studio we're using. Version 7 just will not work, as far as I know. Another thing to differentiate is there is a JRE and a JDK, JDK being development kit, JRE being a release environment. So in this example, because we're going to be working with Android Studio, we do need JDK for the development side. Page 4 in this book actually does a really good job talking about how you download and install those, but ultimately you can jump on Google, walk right through it. I'm going to go through some of the details in a minute here. So once you download and install, or once you download Android Studio, if you're on Windows, this is what the file name will be. You'll want to run that and follow the particular wizard that comes up. For me, I did this on Windows, so these images are from that. Mac is not too much different, although you do have a couple extra steps with dragging the image around. So this is what you'll see, and then if you look over here on the right side of the screen, you will actually see that I'm extracting the SDK. So you'll see some of this stuff just happening. You don't really have to do anything during these screens. Just be prepared for that to take a little bit of time. Now, ultimately, when you finish that, you'll get to the point where you see the screen here. We do, in this example, want to start Android Studio right away. So make sure your box is checked and you hit finish. Over here on the right side of the screen, this is your welcome screen. This is a welcome screen that's going to show when you start Android Studio. Now, if your version of Android Studio is different, your screen might look a little bit different, but hopefully the functionality is remotely similar, so we can kind of keep in touch here. So you're going to hit next on that screen, and then I personally think at this point, because you're getting started, let's just pick standard for everything. Keep all the default settings here. Once you start understanding a little bit more about the ins and outs of Android development, you can actually go in and do some pretty cool custom stuff. Ultimately, though, you can always add components later. So I personally still start with standard, unless I immediately know what I need to set up on that computer right from the get-go. We're going to hit next, and we're just going to verify these settings. Now, this is another thing where we're going to actually be downloading. This will actually take a few minutes to complete. As you can see in this image that I have here on the screen, 887 megabytes to download. That, depending on your connection speed, could be a little bit of time. So I told you this could take a while, so sit there and tap your fingers and think about everything while that's happening. Maybe pause the video and come back. And once that's done, let's head over to the next thing. So once you do have that done, you'll be able to get to a welcome to Android Studio. Android Studio is up and running now. I'm going to say that what you want to do is start a new Android project, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the entire process of getting something up and running. So let's click on Start a New Android Project. Ultimately, you can name these whatever you want. Typically, what I would say to do is, if you have a company domain, for example, for me it's zymo.io, or college, it could be whatever.edu. I just name the application class 1, and you can kind of see how the package name has ended up in almost the reverse of that, with edu.uwgb.class1 being the package name. And I'll explain a little bit more about the package name, but those are very important to keep unique when you start to go publish your application on the store. Your project location, that can be anywhere you want to dump this. I personally, in this example, just kept it as the default setting. And then we're going to hit next. So again, I did say that I do like Android 5.0. So I did change my setting to API level 21, Lollipop. I selected phone and tablet. And as you can see here, I support 71.3% of the devices. But there are some features in 5.0 that I really like. And ultimately, that is good enough for this example. The 71.3 devices is not going to be a problem for this example. Just make sure you know your audience and you pick this appropriately. And also notice that some of the other settings in here, such as like Android TV, Android Wearables, or Android Auto, which I'm really a big fan of Android Auto, by the way, those are other types of projects and things that you can actually set up too. So this is the next screen you're going to get. Just for the sake of simplicity, we're going to select basic activity and hit next. But I do want to stop for a second. I personally prefer having everything empty. So when I go in to make a new project for a production environment, I personally prefer adding no activity, or if I do add an activity, it's going to be an empty activity. You will have your own preferences for that, but I've typically found with the demands of the design that I'm building, these are not really that great for anything that I need to build. I typically have to build everything from the ground up. In this example, we're going to keep it simple. We're going to have a basic activity, and we're going to move forward to the next step. This you can keep all as default. Activity, we'll talk a lot more about that in the next class. And the layout name, we probably will get to that in more detail in a couple classes from now. So just keep this as a default. You're not going to worry about the name right now, but ultimately, when you were to set this up, if you were to set this up for a production environment, you'd want these to be called something important. And typically what I do is you may have a small splash loading thing. You may have something that starts up right when the app starts to figure out where the app needs to go, such as, are you logged in, or do you have the information you need to shortcut your way into the app. So typically I have a screen like that that's really lightweight that I typically start with my base activity, for my base activity name. Now this, for some reason, can take a very long time. I've got like 4 or 5 computers where I've set up Android Studio, and sometimes this can take 20 minutes. I've also had to take 3 minutes. So just go ahead and wait here, and then when this gets done, resume the video. This is another important thing that I felt like talking about here, is if you see that little blue arrow with the green Android head sticking up, and you can kind of see that it's impressed right next to the question mark on the toolbar, this is how you access the window that I'm showing here. Now this is important because you can see which platforms you have installed, and right now I currently only have Marshmallow installed. So I personally need to go in and update to 7.11, and probably grade 7.0 as well, just so I can start doing some of the stuff I'm going to talk about a little bit later with Instant Run. But for now, it looks like I'm building and I only have API level 23, which is Marshmallow. Just keep that in mind. You don't have to worry about too much of the complexity. Just know about what that icon does. Now, the second tab in there is the SDK Tools tab. Now, this will be very important, especially when you want to start doing things such as like Google Play services or adding any type of additional tools that aren't just already installed. So you want to go in here, and you will also see sometimes there's an update, which can actually have some, can be very important, especially if it's a security update. So you'll actually on the right side here see update available or something similar. Currently, I do not have any updates available, so it's just installed and not installed. Just remember, I'm not expecting you to know exactly what this is, and each one of these things does right now. But for now, just remember that the icon to get here and where these are, because you're going to need these from time to time. Now what I want you to do is go over on the left side of the screen and click on the project window. And then I've expanded out the most important areas. So you don't have to worry too much about it. Just get familiar with the project hierarchy. Your Java code is going to be primarily in your Java folder. Notice there's also a couple different package names. The package name I mean is edu.uwgb.class1, and then there's one with Android test and one with test beside it. We're not going to worry about those. You're only going to worry about the one without those beside it right now. Those we may talk about in an advanced lesson later on. The other folders to care about is the RES, which is going to hold all your resources. The layouts, which will be what is actually shown on your screen. The menu, if you notice here, there's a menu. That is actually a smaller piece that gets injected into one of the bigger layouts. So we can talk a little bit more about that. Values would be constant. So if you think about it in the terms of other programming languages, imagine you have a color value you want to be everywhere. You can define that in your colors file. Or strings. So like strings because you want to localize your app later on in a different language. Okay, so we're going to get over to, now that we have all that, we're not going to worry about doing any of the coding or anything now. Let's just get you up and running to make sure everything is working. So the first thing that I like to do after making sure that everything is in good place is hit run. There'll be a menu option at the top that's run, and then hit run app. What you will see is a window like I have here on the left side. Now in this particular case I actually deleted those system images and decided that I needed to create a new one. So I hit the create new virtual device button at the bottom, and then I get a window like over here on the right side of the screen. I personally wanted to pick something that was kind of a bigger phone. The Nexus 5X I found to be a really good one for developing on. So I selected that one, and I'd recommend you just follow these settings for now. You can always go in later and grab a Pixel or one of the other ones. And also another thing to note is you can actually find hardware profiles on some websites that you can import in to get all the configuration. So if there's like a weird phone that you're having trouble with, import the hardware profile. It sometimes works, especially if it's a layout issue. Alright, so once you have this all set up, let's just hit next. Now we get to selecting a system image. Now you shouldn't have one if this is a new install. So in my case, I'm going to download Android 7.0. Now if you remember back, I only have 6.0 Marshmallow installed, but I can actually run what I'm building with 6.0 on the 7.0 or 8.0 device. Now I haven't used anything with 8.0. I'm hearing that that's going to start rolling out soon, so for my sake I'm just going to install NuGet, and what we're going to have happen here is a screen on the right, and that takes a little bit of time. Not sure how large that is, but that will take about 5 or 6 minutes probably to download, and then you just hit finish. So once you hit finish, you're going to come back to the screen where you're selecting your system image, and now as you can tell, NuGet is actually bolder because I have it. It's available. It's all good at that point. It's API level 24. I have an x86 system image, so all super. You don't have to touch anything here. You just want to hit next. Now over here on the right side, what's really handy here is you can actually change the name, and I've actually got my work computer. I have about 15 or so emulator images created. So naming them is really important to me, and I'd always start with the name of the phone no matter what. So I'll have like a Pixel, and I may have an API 21, a Pixel API 26, whatever it ends up being. That's really valuable for me to be able to keep track of that. I personally like starting in the portrait, and if I need to rotate the landscape, that I can do that. Although I have in the past actually made images for tablets that I started in landscape, and that worked pretty well. But ultimately, you can just keep all the default settings here, especially for the Nexus 5X. There are some advanced settings which we won't get into now, but feel free to go in there and look at those. They're all pretty self-explanatory. Now, we've created our virtual device, and it should be available in the list when you hit run app. So you get back here, you should see an available virtual device with Nexus 5X API 24. Just highlight that and just hit OK. Now, sometimes starting the emulator can be quite painful. It has gotten better. It's gotten a lot better. It used to be way worse, but it can take a little bit of time. So what I'd recommend to you is just leave your emulator running. If you need to uninstall the app or delete the app, however you want to say it, absolutely feel free to do that. Ultimately, though, if you can leave your emulator running and you'll hit play, it'll show in the attached devices at the top. So if you looked at, or the connected devices at the top, it'll actually show in there once you're connected to it. You may get this error, and I got this error because I don't have 7.0 or 7.11 installed. And I'm building 6.0 and running on a 7.0 device. It's important if you want to have instant run to match those. In my case, I'm going to proceed without instant run. I don't really need it at this point. Instant run's just a handy way to be able to make changes and see it right on the device on the fly. I have a love-hate relationship with that at this point, but we'll talk about that topic later on. Hopefully this is a stage that you go through as your phone's booting up. Eventually you're going to get a new emulator window that looks like the one on the left. Once the app runs, it's going to have Hello World. You should be able to interact with that bottom right button. That looks like that has a mail envelope on it, where it says replace with your own action. You should also be able to click on the menu button in the top right and see settings. If everything worked correctly, you should be to this point. Now, don't be scared to just go in there and try to figure out how to change Hello World to say your name. I think that would be a fun exercise for you. But don't feel scared if you're intimidated by it either. We're going to go into more detail on that later on. So that's pretty much it for class 1. In the next one, I'm really going to go into a deep dive into the Android Studio interface, as well as starting to dig into some of the activities that we need to use. Primarily, if we get far enough along in the next one, I'm just going to talk about the basics of creating activities. Anyway, I hope this is helpful. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please leave me any feedback you have below. And until next time, peace out.